The topic of this module is psychology and internal states. So let's review, just as we have in the other modules, what is psychology to help us frame what this module is all about. Again, psychology is the scientific study of the mind and behavior. So one of the first things we'll explore and you will read about throughout this module is the idea of consciousness. And consciousness is our subjective awareness of ourselves and our environment, and is functional because it allows us to plan activities and monitor our goals. So just keep in mind again that it is subjective, so it varies from person to person in their interpretation. One of the cool things about this chapter, when it looks into consciousness, it looks into sleep. This chapter actually goes pretty deeply into the topic of sleep. But one thing that I'll cover in this introduction is that of sleep deprivation and its effect on consciousness. So if you look, it shows the continuum of 5 days of sleep deprivation, starting out with difficulty focusing your eyes, which we all know that if we've stayed up late writing a paper or reading for class. After 2 days, add moodiness onto that. After 3, irritability, starting into the memory lapses, and even in some cases, the first signs of hallucinating. Day 4, hallucinations, with the person recognizing that they're not real, like something's really up here. And day 5 and onward is paranoia. So most of us, I hope very few of us, have ever gotten into the 4 or 5 day range, even really the 3 day range, but we all know about sleep deprivation. So for this module and also the following module, you'll hear a lot about Sigmund Freud. And maybe you've heard his name. Now you can see how it's written, how it's spelled. And Sigmund Freud was an Austrian psychologist, and he analyzed the dreams of his patients to help him understand their unconscious needs and desires. And psychotherapists still make use of his technique today. Sigmund Freud is probably the most famous psychologist. In pop culture, you'll see representations of him. Now, and I'll probably speak to this in the next module as well, but his techniques, as far as psychotherapy goes, they are still used, but they're not in vogue. So they aren't what most people see as being the most effective and the most evidence-based. So psychologists in general don't believe that Sigmund Freud's general approach is what research says we should do. Although a lot of it is interesting, and a lot of it we have learned a lot, and psychology has evolved a lot out of what he posited. So Freud believed that the real meaning of dreams is often suppressed by the unconscious mind in order to protect the individual from thoughts and feelings that are hard to cope with. So he thought that by uncovering the real meaning of dreams through what he called psychoanalysis, Freud believed that people could better understand their problems and resolve the issues that create the difficulties in their lives. So as you see in the picture, you have the guy leaning back on the black couch, which is kind of that stereotypical image we have in pop culture of what psychiatrists or psychologists do. And the psychologist with his notepad saying, "Tell me more about it, tell me more about it." Well, that all comes out of Sigmund Freud's kind of psychoanalytic or psychoanalysis model. So when we're talking about consciousness, which is kind of that overall overarching theme of this module, an important thing to think about is hypnosis. And hypnosis is a trance-like state of consciousness, usually induced by a procedure known as hypnotic induction, which consists of heightened suggestibility, deep relaxation, and intense focus. And I can tell you, as I'm sitting here recording this swirly, colorful image I have on this slide, talk about distracting. But that's the kind of things that are used in hypnosis. Some people are more, for lack of a better word, hypnotizable than others. One of my professors actually related a story of how he was hypnotized, and the hypnotist was able to suggest him, to do a lot of funny things, but that's not the case for everybody. So, another thing, or other things that affect consciousness, are drugs. So, psychoactive drug is a chemical that changes our states of consciousness, and particularly our perceptions and moods. These drugs are found in everyday foods and beverages, including chocolate, coffee, and soft drinks. Whew, may as well stop right there with me. Caffeine all the way. As well as in alcohol and over-the-counter drugs such as aspirin, Tylenol, and cold and cough medication, and they are also prescribed as sleeping pills, tranquilizers, and anti-anxiety medications, and they may be taken illegally for recreational purposes. Sadly, we know a lot of people who, most of us know somebody who struggles with drug addiction. But, there is a continuum of it, and all of these drugs, again, change our state of consciousness. I definitely need my caffeine in the mornings to be what I fully feel is awake and conscious, but those are just some examples. So another facet of the study of internal states is that of sensation, and it is awareness resulting from the stimulation of a sense organ. So I picked this picture because it really gets at all the senses. Taste. You could see maybe the different ones have different smells, texture, sight, maybe everything but hearing, maybe if you crunched them. But, that picture really picks up on the senses. And then there's perception, the organization and interpretation of sensations. And I thought these images that were very much the optical illusions really go well with this module and the talk of perception. Sensation and perception work seamlessly together to allow us to experience the world through our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin, but also to combine what we are currently learning from the environment with what we already know about it to make judgments and to choose appropriate behaviors. Psychophysics is the branch of psychology that studies the effects of physical stimuli on sensory perceptions and mental states. And the field of psychophysics was founded by German psychologist Gustav Fechner, who was the first to study the relationship between the strength of a stimulus and a person's ability to detect the stimulus. One of the important processes required in vision is the perception of form, and several famous psychologists argued that we create forms out of their component sensations based on the idea of the Gestalt. Yeah, kind of an odd pronunciation, Gestalt, which is a meaningfully organized whole. The idea of the Gestalt is that the whole is more important than the sum of its parts. So remember that statement, the whole is more important than the sum of its parts. And I chose this image. To the left you have just one little component piece of this larger picture on the right. And you could take all these different little black circles and look at them apart, but when you look at them together, you see they make up this cube optical illusion design. That's because the whole is more than the sum of its parts. A good example of a gestalt. Proprioception is the sense of body position and movement. That's a sense that we don't think about very often, proprioception. I work a lot in the K-12 setting in public schools with occupational therapists, and they often work with students who have difficulties with the sense of proprioception, so knowing where their bodies are in space. You see this a lot with students with autism, but just any number. If you have, my husband's 6'4", he has that tall man syndrome, so he is constantly hitting his head on things and underestimating the height of doorways and things like that. So that could be considered an issue related to proprioception. So I hope you learned a lot and that this video introduction really sets up what you'll be learning in this module. And I challenge you to think about different gestalts you see in your environment. Maybe you like the artist Monet. And you could see how if you just took one little section of a Monet painting, it just looks like individual random colored brushstrokes. But when you step back and look at the whole, the gestalt shows a beautiful picture of water lilies or whatnot. So I challenge you to look at those things. Good luck and enjoy what you learn.